A representative from the United Nations describes the situation in Syria as the most serious crisis facing the international community. UN inspectors are in Syria. They're working to figure out if chemical weapons have been used in the country. The UN describes chemical weapons use as outrageous and unacceptable. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, considers chemical weapons a threat to international peace. Tom Foreman explains the impact of one of these kinds of weapons.
Sarin can be launched in an artillery shell or a missile. It can be dropped from an airplane. It goes out as a liquid, but as it spreads out, it very quickly and easily turns into a gas. Now, we showed it there, but the truth is it is colorless. It is odorless. You would have no idea you were even being attacked by it, even though it's much more lethal than cyanide. What does it do to people? Well, it can cause blurred vision, rapid breathing, heavy sweats, confusion, headaches, in the worst cases, nausea, convulsions, paralysis, and as it shuts down the ability of the body to breathe, even death, and in the worst cases, that can come very, very quickly, perhaps within even 1 minute.
The U.S. and other countries are considering whether to take action against Syria. On Tuesday, the White House said President Obama was reviewing his options but had not decided anything at that time. One option could be a military strike. U.S. warships, like you see in this animation, are in the Mediterranean Sea. Military officials say they're ready if the president gives an order to strike. Most of you who participated in the quick poll on our blog think the U.S. should not take military action in Syria. Here's where the latest numbers were last night. 59% said the U.S. should not strike. 36% said it should. 5% were undecided. Kathy says we have nothing to do with what's going on there, and we shouldn't get involved even if chemical weapons were involved. Mike writes that while there are many tragic situations in the world, I question if the USA should always feel like it must step up and lead a response. Trent says chemical weapons are serious, and in that region of the world, they cannot be ignored. The U.S. has a responsibility to exert influence in this situation. From Anthony and Nick, we don't need to jump into another war right now. We need to focus on our own problems. Noah and Leilani say the U.S. should take action. Syria's civil war could get way out of hand soon, and we need to control it before it does. And from Georgia, let's forget about violence and work on the economy. We've got enough on our plate. The U.S. military jury says Major Nidal Hasan should be put to death. That verdict yesterday comes nearly 4 years after a shooting at a U.S. Army base. 13 people were killed in the attack at Fort Hood, Texas in 2009. 32 others were wounded. Hasan was convicted of murder and attempted murder charges for all of those victims. Hasan served as his own attorney in the trial and refused to offer much of a defense or any closing arguments in the sentencing phase. The jury's recommendation of the death penalty goes to an Army general to be reviewed.
It's time for the shout out. On the periodic table, what does an element's atomic number represent? If you think you know it, then shout it out. Is it the number of protons, electrons, neutrons, or protons and neutrons? You've got 3 seconds. Go. An element's atomic number is the number of protons in its nucleus. That's your answer, and that's your shout out.
When setting the periodic table, leave room for an extra element. Researchers in Sweden say they've made one by slamming together the atoms of calcium and americium. And it's a beast. Its atomic number is 115, much heavier than lead or uranium. Its temporary name is ununpentium, much harder to say than lead or uranium. But you can't see it. Right after the atoms collided, the element disappeared in a flash of radiation. You can't find it. It doesn't exist in nature. Swedish scientists can't say they invented it. Russian researchers first made this element in 2004. And you can't really do anything with it. They say it's just not practical. Some folks might be elementally confused about why we should care at all. Well, researchers say it did confirm that the 2004 study created a new element, even for just a moment. Scientists hope that one day, experiments like these could lead to the lasting creation of a new, usable element. And if ununpentium is approved by a committee combining members of the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry and the International Union of Pure and Applied Physics, say that 3 times fast, it could change the periodic table as we know it. Like everything on that chart, it's elementary.
Okay, next story today. On this day, August 29th, back in 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall along the U.S. Gulf Coast. The storm's impact was massive. More than 1,800 people were killed, most of them in Louisiana. In New Orleans, some levees, these barriers designed to prevent flooding, failed. 80% of the city ended up underwater. Total damage estimate for Katrina, more than $100 billion. When it hit land, it was a Category 3 hurricane with winds around 127 miles per hour. Not the strongest hurricane ever to hit the U.S. But FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, considers Katrina the single most catastrophic natural disaster in U.S. history. People gathered in the nation's capital yesterday to commemorate the 1963 March on Washington. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the march the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. This is what the space between the Lincoln and Washington memorials looked like 50 years ago, and this is what it looked like yesterday. Crowds gathered to hear from political leaders, celebrities, and the family of famous civil rights leaders. Leaders like Dr. King. The March on Washington was where he gave his famous speech about his dream for an America free of racial discrimination. That speech ended with Dr. King's call to let freedom ring from every corner of the country. Yesterday, Dr. King's family symbolically carried out that call, and President Obama talked about the legacy and impact of the civil rights movement.
Because they marched, America became more free and more fair, not just for African Americans, but for women and Latinos, Asians and Native Americans, for Catholics, Jews and Muslims, for gays, for Americans with disabilities. America changed for you and for me, and the entire world drew strength from that example.
I was out there covering this giant event, cub reporter with a couple of cameras photographing the whole thing. I was the official government photographer. I couldn't be denied access to any part of it. I was sort of like a free roving guy. You could see the access I had, the proximity I had. It looks like they're in their backyard singing folk songs to each other just for fun. But there's hundreds of thousands of people gathered around and listening to them. I'm really so happy with this picture. It shows all the emotion that's gone through this man's face. He was the guy who created the March on Washington. This picture shows the spirit of it. Another face in the crowd. It just happens to be caught at the right moment. I saw this earnest face. She's really a beautiful young girl, and she was so intense. I wasn't the only one to be struck by it. She has become like the face of the March on Washington. I wanted to show the people who couldn't be there the greatness of it, the majesty of it, the scope of it, close-ups and long shots, and all the faces in the crowd, and not only the superstars, but the people themselves. I was just a kid, I was just starting out. It was like, what if, you're a freelancer and this is your first job? What if your first job is like the biggest event that's ever happened in your lifetime?
Football season is here. What does that have to do with today's roll call? One of our schools is finally part of football season. The Switzerland County Pacers from VV, Indiana have their first football team ever. Good luck, guys. Hopping across the state line, we're going to Asheville, Ohio, home of the Teays Valley Vikings. And we round out the roll call with the Knights from Oakleaf High School in Orange Park, Florida. Every year, the streets in the city of Buñol, Spain run red with tomato juice. The annual Tomatina Festival, which celebrates the summer tomato harvest, also looks like a good excuse to get messy. Thousands of visitors crop up there every year to participate in the prodigious produce pelting party. That's a mouthful. But so are the 130 tons of tomatoes used during the festival. If that's someone's idea of how to paint the town red, then it's fine by us. Once all those tomatoes are gone, the whole thing may seem fruitless. That will eat up all the time we have for today. We're going to catch up with you again tomorrow for more CNN Student News.